Okay, so many of you know about schizophrenia, but I need you to understand one thing. It's very, very complicated, and I'm just going to start talking about it in this video, and you're going to understand how complicated it is. So you don't even have to understand everything in this video, but just watching it and trying to understand, for some of you, may be enough to show you how complicated it actually is. You can't just call them crazy people. There's so many factors at play, and actually we're even questioning today if we should even be diagnosing it the way we diagnose it, by just giving it a blanket name. There are so many symptoms to schizophrenia that are completely unlinked. You can have one of them, you can have all of them, you can have, well, it's very rare for you to have all of them. You can have one of them, or you can have multiple, whatever. So the main types of symptoms are positive symptoms, negative symptoms, and disorganization based symptoms. Positive symptoms are something you have, like voices or delusions or paranoia. Negative symptoms are something you don't have, such as they have a degeneration of certain parts of their brain, which cause them to be unsocial, or have no motivation to speak, or have no motivation to move much. And don't get lost with the word motivation. Like, not having enough neurons in certain parts of your brain that are associated to social skills make you not want to socialize at all. Even if you went to a place, you can't even process that you're having a good time, because your brain just doesn't even want to go there, and when it is there, it can't really be forced to have a good time. It has to want to have a good time. And so there's really no answer, because we can't give you, it's like physically impossible to give people more brain cells. The brain degenerates with time, which is why schizophrenia occurs later in life in a lot of cases. And it's also why the symptoms of those people who have degeneration that causes schizophrenia, it's why a lot of them just generally have one or two negative symptoms, but not really the psychotic symptoms of delusion or grandeur or visual hallucinations. Hold on a minute. Oh. Damn, sorry, I had to sneeze there. I will have blanked that out, because this video is good, according to my current thinking. We'll see later. Anyway, so examples of negative symptoms are asociality, so a lack of motivation to socialize; alogia, which is a lack of motivation to speak; I forget what, catatonia, that's the one. I was going to say, I forgot what it's called. Catatonia is where you don't even have the motivation to move. People will just sit there in one position. Maybe they'll be smiling with their hand up, and it really is tough to see, because these people, they just can't motivate themselves to move. And what that means is that if you have no motivation to move, you're not moving, and you can't force yourself to have motivation, because motivation is based on physical parts of the brain. Physical neurons are required for motivation. Dopamine neurons are one of those, to those that don't know. So it really is a strange phenomenon. And so already I've given you multiple different symptoms, all of which, individuals may have one, they may have multiple, they may have none of them, they may have other ones that I haven't listed. And so already you're starting to see that this situation is very complicated, because you can't say that the person who has a delusion of grandeur believes that he's been sent down to tell the world to eat flowers or whatever it is. I exaggerate with that example, but some people do believe they've been sent by God to push this new idea or whatever. And not all of those people are schizophrenic, because some people are literally looking for some kind of purpose in life, which is a bit different. But alright, I'm waffling on. That situation is a bit complicated. So if you took one of these people who has paranoia, let's say, believes that the government has put a chip in their brain and they're stealing their thoughts or whatever, and you put them in a room with someone who only has asociality, you're telling me that both of them have schizophrenia, but they're both completely different in the way they are and the way they think, the way they act, the way they speak. And already we're seeing that it's a very complicated situation. Now there's a third type, which is called disorganization, so disorganized speech. You would, a third type of symptom. So it could be disorganized speech or inappropriate affect. So disorganized speech is where your sentence will start with one point and end with a completely different point, and in between you'll probably have multiple different points that just don't even link with each other. So maybe you'll talk about your dog, you'll talk about the sky, you'll talk about that tree, you'll talk about world domination, all in one sentence. And each part of the sentence, or in multiple sentences, but part of one response or paragraph. And none of those things will relate to each other. I would give you an example, but I can't do it justice right now, spontaneously. But then inappropriate effect would be like an inappropriate answer. So let's just say you ask them a question about how their dog is doing, and they reply by telling you about world domination. So it's inappropriate to the social situation, but they don't really see that. They just respond in the way that they think is okay, so to speak. Now, what needs to be said is 100% of schizophrenics have a negative symptom. So that's a symptom based in brain degeneration. So now we're in a position where you could argue that brain degeneration causes negative symptoms and positive symptoms are caused by, before I can talk about that, I need to tell you what potentially is an explanation for certain aggressive schizophrenic types. There is a hypothesis called the D2 hypothesis of schizophrenia, where it is claimed that those with genetic traits that give them a proclivity to develop schizophrenia have an excess of D2 dopamine receptors in their brain, and those receptors are in their highest numbers in the substantia nigra, which is the lower part of the brain, which contains your amygdala and your, I believe, the reptilian brain and the midbrain and the pons. Anyway, I might be wrong about that. I know it's definitely in the base. It definitely contains the amygdala. Basically, the areas that regulate emotion, and so you could argue that is why they can be so aggressive in their ideas and in their beliefs, because a delusion of grandeur, for example, the idea that I'm here to give you a message on behalf of the spirits, that gives you an aggressive purpose, so to speak. Not even an aggressive purpose, it gives you status. You are the chosen one. And so that likely satisfies, or that likely is created by the part of your brain, the substantia nigra, that regulates emotion, and that likely gives you an emotional response. So now that you're in this domain of being this messenger for the spirits, you are giving yourself the pleasure hormones that you desire because people believe you. So as long as you're fed your delusion, you're getting satisfaction. But then in Western cultures, for example, the same delusion could manifest itself through the idea that the government is spying on us, bugging the entire house, and has put a chip in my brain and is planting thoughts in my brain or stealing my thoughts, I don't know. And the proof is that I got a scar the other day, and that must have been when they did it. This is a very similar delusion, and you're satisfying the same circuitry by attacking the government through your knowledge. You know they're bad. They are terrible. I hate them. And that comes from the D2 hypothesis or that could be explained by the D2 hypothesis of schizophrenia. And so you got two completely different types of schizophrenia, but their class is the same thing, so to speak. It's only an individual that knows about schizophrenia that will know the difference. But what's interesting is you could argue that the D2 hypothesis explains positive symptoms and that the degeneration aspect explains negative symptoms. But you'd be wrong, because voices, for example, are a positive symptom because they are something you have. And where this gets complicated is, well, let me explain why voices potentially counts as a degeneration-based symptom. There is a theory which has some weight to it in terms of testing and empirical evidence that an individual that hears hallucinatory voices is hearing their own voice, but the part of their brain that's associated to tagging their own voice, the voice in their head that is, doesn't have as many neurons and is finding it hard to work while the brain is thinking, and so has to assign a random tag to the voices, and so that's why it sounds like a voice within their head, but actually it's just their own voice, just hasn't been given the tag of no voice. So right now, if you were to think a sentence in your voice, you can't hear it, but you can understand it fully. Why? It's because you can hear it, it's just that your brain has tagged it as its own. So it's like given 0 as on pitch and tone. And so you can understand the language, you just can't hear it as such, even though you can kind of hear it, so to speak. So there's a theory that the pitch and tone aspect is massively hindered, and there's a lot of evidence for that. Now, when that combines with the potential D2 or increase in D2 receptors in the emotional part of the brain, we get a situation where the voice is influenced by the need for aggression or emotion. And so that's where it gets very, very traumatic for the individual, even if they don't have an increase in D2 receptors around the substantia nigra, so the emotional part of the brain, to those of you that need reminding, if you're still watching this. Even if you don't have that, it can be very traumatic for the individual, because now it's like something's wrong with me. This voice is always here, this voice is always making noise. And sometimes the voice can just analyze what you're doing in your day. It can just tell you, pick up that can, pick up the chocolate bar. That's a voice that you would normally have in your head that you don't even hear sometimes because you're not even paying attention to it. But that's happening. But with them, because it's being tagged as a voice, they're forced to pay attention to it. And so it's always there, and it makes them feel like there's something wrong with them and they must pay attention to it. And long term, that can cause degeneration in other parts of their brain, because they're spending time panicking and really strengthening the lower part of their brain, the substantia nigra, and really developing emotional responses. And maybe they have the potential. I'm not saying this is proven with data, I'm not saying that this is everyone, but increasing your usage of certain parts of your brain naturally makes you decrease other parts of your brain in terms of their usage, or allows you to use certain parts of your brain to regulate that part and make decisions based on these voices or these ideas or these emotions. And so maybe you can degenerate the social part of your brain because you don't want to be around people when you can hear voices and things. I don't know. I'm just putting out a hypothetical statement there. So this is why schizophrenia is so complicated. And like I said, it has, well, I didn't say this, but it has genetic aspects which would possibly be explained to some degree by the D2 hypothesis, but it also has degenerative aspects which could be explained by which would explain the negative symptoms. I think that one is pretty much proven through brain scanning studies, the degeneration aspect, that is. But then there's another factor. There was an issue. I don't remember the country. Was it Sweden? The Swedish famine or something like that. I don't remember the name of it, but maybe go research it, Google it if you're interested. There was an issue where mothers were forced to starve because I believe Hitler or some fascist country next to Sweden, or whichever country they were in, forced a famine through diverting food on that country, and so mothers were not able to feed their children or feed themselves, which would mean the child suffered. And what happened years after that is that there was a huge increase in the amount of schizophrenic cases in the children that were born in that period. And so what that means is that there are some environmental factors that cause biological change. So it's not necessarily all in your DNA. Some of it could be that the mother was stressed. We don't know what it is that caused the increase in schizophrenia. Clearly it was to do with the food, but we don't know if it was the lack of food or if it was the stress that she was under or the emotions that she felt during that period, or if they were all factors. I do believe that the actual physical food factor was probably a major factor in a lack of nourishment. Maybe the lower parts of the brain, which I believe developed too much, and so not even developed too much, maybe developed to a higher ratio compared to the other parts of the brain, the upper cortexes, and maybe it's just about having a higher ratio of dopamine D2 receptors to other dopamine receptors, which are not part of the substantia nigra. Maybe it's that. I don't know. There's weight to any point really right now because we're that clueless about this. We have plenty of knowledge about schizophrenia and schizophrenics, absolutely, but we don't have any conclusive answers, and the only real way to help them is to treat them with an antipsychotic. Look, those are very good. There's a lot of criticism around antipsychotics, but at the end of the day, that's all we have right now. And the problem is not in the antipsychotic, it's in the fact that there's no money to be made in antipsychotic meds, so no one's really developing them, which you can't blame the pharmaceutical company for that, because what the hell can they do about that? Their idea is to make money. They're not here to solve problems for free. And so, like I said, I have problems. I don't have problems with big pharma. I want people to understand that they are not as ethical as you might think. And if you think they're ethical, then, I mean, I don't think anyone thinks they're ethical, fine. But then why are you trusting the medication that you get from them through antidepressants? Why are you happy to go and take an addictive substance like that? That's a food for thought question, because you can say you don't trust them, but you are consuming their product to a very high capacity as well. Like, prescriptions for that stuff are going up, and GPs as well as patients are both complicit in that with regards to antidepressants, because it's easier for the GP to just give you this pill to get you to go away, and the patient will want the pill and they're happy to take that because it will give them this happiness straight away, and the doctor's saying, here, take it. So they can easily say, no, I want to see a therapist. And it's like, that's a very difficult thing to ask the GP, because the GP in this country, in England that is going to say, look, there's a waiting list. I think they only reserve therapy for the most advanced, most desperate cases. So I hope you learned something from this video. I know I said a lot of things. Let me see if I can think of one last thing. I had a good point and I think I missed it or forgot it. No, I'm just going to end it. Done.